My mom left me alone in a mall when I was 4, vanishing without a trace. 20 years later, she reached out, expecting forgiveness, and I decided it was time to confront the mother I never knew. Part 1. I was around 4 years old when my mom, Anna, decided to take me to the mall. Yeah, I was pretty young, but I still remember bits of it pretty clearly. It's weird how certain memories just stick in your brain. This one's burned in there like a bad tattoo. So, Anna takes me to this big mall, which is a treat in my little kid mind. Malls were like a magical place back then, bright lights, tons of people, those huge fountains with coins everywhere. I thought it was going to be some fun day out with her. Little did I know that was the last thing on her mind. We walk around for a bit, then she spots this little kiosk in the middle of the mall. You know, one of those tiny stands where they sell random junk, keychains, cheap jewelry, whatever. She walks over to the guy working there, and I'm just kind of hanging back, looking around at all the people. I didn't think anything of it when she started talking to him. She was my mom, right? I trusted her. Then, she does this thing that, even now, makes me shake my head. She leans down to my level, looks me right in the eyes, and says, "I need you to stay here for just a minute, alright? I'm just going to the bathroom. I'll be back before you know it." I mean, I was 4, what was I going to say? No. I nodded and sat down on this little stool by the kiosk. The guy working there looked a bit surprised but didn't really ask questions. I'm guessing he thought she'd be right back, too. So, there I am, just waiting. At first, I'm looking around, totally unaware that this minute is going to turn into something way longer. I remember watching people walk by, holding shopping bags, laughing, talking, whatever. Time passes slowly for a kid, but even at that age, I could tell it was taking a little too long. Minutes turned into, I don't even know, but it felt like forever. The guy at the kiosk, I remember he was nice enough. He'd check in on me every now and then, probably starting to realize that maybe she wasn't coming back. He even tried to make small talk, asking me about my favorite toy or something. I don't remember much about the conversation, just that he was trying to keep me entertained, but I could see he was getting nervous, like he didn't know what he was supposed to do with me. Eventually, he starts looking around, probably hoping to spot her coming back down the mall. By this point, it was becoming pretty obvious that just a minute had turned into something way longer. He asked me if I knew my mom's phone number, but I was just a kid, I didn't know any numbers or how to contact anyone. I just sat there, feeling that weird sinking feeling in my stomach, like something wasn't right. After what felt like forever, I noticed the mall was starting to get quieter. I was still sitting there, holding on to my little toy, waiting. That's when the guy called over a mall security guard. I remember the guard leaning down next to me, trying to look friendly, asking if I knew where my mom went or if I had any other family nearby. I just shook my head. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew enough to know she was gone. The guard and the kiosk guy start talking, trying to figure out what to do with me. They look worried, whispering to each other, while I just sit there, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The guard eventually takes me by the hand, leading me away from the kiosk and towards some kind of security office in the mall. The security office was this tiny, cold room with bright lights and a weird smell. They gave me a snack and a juice box, trying to keep me calm, telling me they were going to find my mom. But I could tell they didn't believe their own words. They kept glancing at each other, probably thinking she wasn't coming back. I don't remember crying, even though I felt like I should have been. I just sat there, sipping on the juice, feeling numb. It's weird, at that age, I probably couldn't put it into words, but deep down, I knew this was a big deal. I didn't know where she went, but I knew that this wasn't normal. Kids aren't supposed to get left behind in the middle of a mall. After a while, some social workers showed up. They started asking me questions, simple stuff, like my name, if I knew where I lived, if I had other family. I didn't have many answers for them. All I knew was my grandparents' house, the one place that felt safe. So, I told them about my grandparents, and they eventually contacted them. When my grandparents showed up, they looked as if they'd been through hell. My grandma had this pale, worried look on her face, like she'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen her. She didn't say much to the social workers, she just grabbed me in this tight hug, holding me like she was afraid I'd disappear too. My grandpa, on the other hand, was talking to the social workers, asking what the hell had happened, probably wondering how his daughter could leave her kid like that. Looking back, I can see now that this was the breaking point for them. They'd been dealing with Anna's behavior for years, always hoping she'd grow up and take responsibility. But leaving me in a mall with some random guy, that was too much, even for them. They took me home, and from that point on, it was clear that they weren't going to let her keep doing this to me. They took control, made sure I was safe, and gave me a real home, one where I didn't have to wonder if I'd get left behind again. That mall memory. It's like a scar that doesn't fade. The waiting, the quiet panic, the pitying looks from strangers, it's all burned into my head. It's a weird feeling, knowing your own mom could just walk away like that, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I don't think I fully understood it back then, but even as a kid, part of me knew that was the moment everything changed. After that whole mall incident, everything changed. My grandparents and my aunt stepped in completely, like some line had been crossed that there was no coming back from. I was still too young to understand the full scope of what happened, but I could feel the difference. Suddenly, my life had a lot more stability, and I didn't have to keep wondering when Anna would show up or if she'd leave me somewhere again. My aunt, who I ended up calling Mom, took over as my full-time parent. To her, it wasn't even a question, she just stepped in and did what had to be done. She adopted me not long after that day at the mall, and from then on, I was officially her son. I still saw my grandparents all the time, and they were more like extra parents than anything else. They made sure I knew I was loved, safe, and not going anywhere. Growing up, I didn't really know any different. I thought this was my family, the people who were there for me, my mom and grandparents. There was no more talk about Anna, and honestly, she was just a faded memory after a while. I had a mom, my aunt, and she did a better job raising me than Anna ever could have. She made sure I went to school, that I had friends, hobbies, the usual kid stuff. I was always a pretty quiet kid, shy too, I guess. That's to be expected when you've been through what I went through. But my new mom, the real mom as far as I'm concerned, did everything she could to bring me out of my shell. She enrolled me in after-school clubs, took me to soccer games, went to every single parent-teacher meeting. She put in the work, she made it her mission to show me what a real family was supposed to look like. And my grandparents were always there, too. They'd tell me stories, teach me things about their lives, even show me old photo albums of when they were young. It was like they wanted me to know that I had history, roots. I didn't need Anna's approval or love, because I had a whole family that actually gave a damn about me. Looking back, there was always this silent agreement between them, my mom and my grandparents, that Anna was off limits. They didn't want me to feel like I was missing anything, so they never mentioned her. There were no awkward stories, no accidental slips. It was like she'd never existed in the first place, which, at the time, was fine with me. I didn't remember much about her anyway, except that she left me behind, and that was enough to know. My mom was careful about it too. She'd always find ways to make me feel special, make me feel like I was worth the trouble. I remember one time I came home from school after hearing other kids talk about their moms, and I asked her why she wasn't my real mom. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "I may not have brought you into this world, but I chose to keep you in my life, and that's what matters." She didn't make a big deal out of it, didn't try to explain everything. She just made sure I knew that I was loved. It was like that every day, really. I didn't get spoiled, but I got all the love and attention I needed. She taught me things a dad would usually teach too. She showed me how to ride a bike, taught me how to swim, and even helped me figure out how to fix things around the house. And she did it all with this patience that, looking back, I probably didn't deserve sometimes. But she stuck with it, and I started seeing her as the only mom I needed. I had no reason to think about Anna, and it stayed that way for years. When I hit my teens, I started piecing things together a bit more. I noticed how they'd avoid certain questions or quickly change the subject if I asked about where I came from. I think a part of me started to understand that there was a story here they weren't telling me. But I also didn't push for answers, because deep down, I didn't want to know. I didn't want to risk finding out that my past was uglier than I already thought. As I got older, I could see how much my mom had sacrificed to raise me. She didn't have to do any of it, but she did. She could have just lived her life, maybe even started her own family. Instead, she put everything on hold for me, treating me like her own son from day one. I can't imagine the weight of that responsibility, especially since it wasn't something she'd ever planned for. But she took it on, and I never once heard her complain. My grandparents too, they weren't young when they took me in, but they did it without a second thought. They kept me grounded, made sure I had family traditions to hold on to, stories to remember, even silly little family quirks. It's the kind of stuff that made me feel like I belonged, that I wasn't just some kid abandoned in a mall, but a real part of a family with history and values. I guess you could say they all tried to give me a normal life, as much as they could. They'd take me on weekend trips to the lake, we'd go camping in the summer, even did family movie nights with popcorn and all that. My grandparents would sit with me after dinner, playing card games or teaching me old songs they used to sing when they were kids. It was little things like that, the simple stuff, that really made me feel like I had a family. By the time I got to high school, I pretty much forgot Anna even existed. I had friends, school activities, and a family that was always there for me. I had a mom who took care of everything, a grandma who spoiled me in her own quiet way, and a grandpa who taught me things every boy should know. Anna was just this ghost of a memory, something I barely thought about, if ever. The truth was, I didn't need her. I had all the love and support I could ever want. My mom and my grandparents, they were the ones who showed me what it meant to be a family. They never let me feel like I was a burden, even though I probably was in some ways. And I know now that they didn't talk about Anna because they didn't want me feeling like I was missing out. They wanted to protect me, and they did. Growing up, I didn't know it at the time, but every little thing they did was to make sure I never felt like I was abandoned. They turned a pretty crappy start into something good, something that made me feel whole, like I belonged somewhere. I didn't question it, I just took it all in and grew up in the only family that ever mattered. And as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it. So, fast forward to a couple of months ago. I'm 25 now, got my life together, and honestly hadn't thought about Anna in years. She was nothing more than a blurry memory in the back of my mind. Until one day, out of nowhere, I get a Facebook message. I open it and, bam, there it is, a message from Anna herself. It was strange. She starts off with this whole "hey, I know this is sudden," and then drops the big reveal, like I'm supposed to be blown away by it. She goes on to explain that she's my biological mother, she used those exact words, and says she's reaching out because she wants to explain everything. It was weird reading her message, like after all these years, she suddenly thinks I'd be interested in what she has to say. I couldn't even believe it was real at first. She tells me she's doing well now, that she's married, has a nice house, 2 daughters, and a good job. I remember feeling this kind of disbelief reading how casually she described her new life, as if she wasn't the same woman who left me in a mall kiosk when I was a kid. And the part that got me, she mentioned that her husband doesn't even know I exist. Yep, she's been married all this time and kept me a secret from her new family. It was like she was still ashamed of me, just keeping me out of sight and out of mind. Then she says she wants to meet up, but not at her house. She didn't want her husband to find out about me yet, which, honestly, made my blood boil a little. So she just expected me to meet her in some neutral spot, keep it on the down low, pretend like it's no big deal? I could feel the nerve behind every word she wrote. For a couple of days, I didn't even respond. I talked to my mom, the real mom, my aunt who raised me, about it, and she just said it was my decision, but that she'd support whatever I chose. My grandparents, they didn't have much to say either, just told me to be careful, like they could sense this wouldn't end well. After a lot of back and forth in my head, I finally replied. I agreed to meet her, mostly because I was curious, maybe even wanted a bit of closure. I told her to pick a spot, and she chose a coffee shop. I'm guessing she wanted something public in case I freaked out or made a scene. The whole thing felt so calculated, like she'd really thought through every detail of how she'd keep her new life separate from this one meeting with me. The day of the meetup, I was nervous but also kind of numb. I didn't know what to expect from her. I walked into that coffee shop, and there she was, sitting by the window with this awkward smile on her face. She looked older, sure, but still had this smug confidence about her, like she was in control. It didn't feel like I was meeting a mom I hadn't seen in years, it felt more like I was meeting a stranger. She stood up, tried to give me a hug, but I kept it distant, just nodded and sat down. I think she sensed I wasn't thrilled, but she pushed on anyway. She started off with all the usual small talk, acting like this was just a normal reunion. I could tell she was testing the waters, maybe hoping I'd open up first. But I didn't give her anything. Then she says, "I'm so proud of you," and I swear, something snapped in me right there. Proud? Proud of what, exactly? For surviving without her? For building a life she wasn't a part of? It felt fake, like she just said it to make herself feel better. The whole conversation felt like she was playing a part, like she wanted to come off as the caring mom who made a tough decision. But it didn't sit right with me, I could see through it plain as day. This wasn't about reconnecting with me, it was about her trying to feel better about herself. As I sat there, watching her spin this story, I started realizing I didn't need any of this. I didn't need her explanations, her closure, or her approval. She was just a stranger to me, and the family I already had, the people who'd actually been there, were all I needed. Sitting across from Anna in that coffee shop was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Here she was, this woman who ditched me when I was 4, acting like she had some kind of right to reconnect now. She kept smiling like she thought everything was fine, like we were 2 old friends just catching up. But I didn't feel like smiling, I felt like asking her where the hell she'd been my whole life. She started talking, trying to sound like she cared, saying she was so proud of what I'd done with my life. And honestly, that just made me mad. How could she be proud of me when she hadn't been around for a single part of it? She didn't know anything about me, what I'd been through, or how hard my mom, the real mom who raised me, worked to make sure I had a good life. When she kept going, talking about how happy she was that I turned out well, it started to feel like she was trying to pat herself on the back, as if she'd played some part in my life going right. Like, no, Anna, you weren't there for any of it, and you sure as hell didn't help make me the person I am today. But I sat there, trying to keep my cool, because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she'd gotten to me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I interrupted her, told her straight up that I didn't need her to tell me she was proud of me. I told her that she wasn't a part of my life, that she hadn't been for over 20 years, and she didn't get to waltz in now and act like she'd been this supportive, caring parent. She looked shocked, like she genuinely hadn't expected me to say that. She tried to defend herself, saying things had been complicated when she was young, that she'd made some mistakes, but that she'd changed. She kept saying it like it was supposed to mean something, like I was supposed to forgive her just because she'd gotten her life together now. I told her, point blank, that none of it mattered to me. I said, "You left me, Anna, you didn't show up when it counted, and now you have this whole new life with a husband and 2 daughters who probably think you're the perfect mom. But you're a stranger to me." I could see the hurt in her eyes, and maybe if I was a softer person, I'd have felt bad, but I didn't. She made her choices a long time ago, and I was just a consequence she didn't want to deal with. When I mentioned her other family, that's when she really started to crack. She looked down, mumbled something about how her husband didn't know about me yet, that she hadn't figured out how to tell him. I just stared at her, letting that sink in for both of us. She didn't even have the guts to tell her own husband that she had another child. She wanted me to call her mom, but she couldn't even tell her own family I existed. That was it for me. I told her, "Look, if you're here because you need some kind of forgiveness or to feel better about what you did, I'm not the one who's going to give that to you. Focus on your 2 kids, the ones you actually showed up for, because I'm done. I don't need your pity, your approval, or whatever you think you're offering. I have a family. One that never gave up on me." She started to cry right there in the coffee shop, and for a second, I almost felt something. But then I remembered all those years I'd spent wondering why she wasn't around, and it hardened me right back up. I didn't know her a thing. She'd made her bed, and it was her mess to lie in. I stood up, told her goodbye, and walked out without looking back. As I stepped out of that coffee shop, I felt lighter, like I'd left a burden behind that I didn't even realize I was carrying. Whatever closure she thought she was giving me, she'd been 20 years too late. I thought I'd feel some kind of relief, and in a way, I did. It was like closing the door on a part of my life that had always been lurking in the shadows. But it wasn't as simple as just letting it go. The whole thing kept nagging at me, especially when I started telling friends and family about what happened. Everyone had an opinion. Most people close to me, especially my mom, the real one who raised me, were supportive. They said I did what I needed to do, that I didn't owe Anna anything. My mom just gave me this knowing look when I told her, nodded, and said, "You did right." She knew what I'd gone through and never once tried to force me to feel something I didn't. She just let me be, and honestly, that's all I'd ever needed from a mom, someone who actually cared about me without any strings attached. But some people didn't see it that way. My cousin, for instance, was pretty blunt about thinking I'd been harsh. She told me that no parent ever wants to hear their kids say they don't care about them. She kept saying, "People make mistakes, and maybe Anna really has changed. She's probably lived with regret for years, and you just threw that back in her face." That part stung a bit, I won't lie. There was a tiny voice in the back of my head wondering if I'd been too cold, too dismissive. But then I'd think back to my actual life, the one Anna chose to have no part of. If she had any regrets, she had 20 years to act on them. 20 years to reach out, 20 years to even show up once. But she didn't. I mean, maybe she had changed, sure. But if she could change now, that just meant she'd always been capable of it. She'd just chosen not to do it when it came to me. So yeah, it felt like a last-minute attempt to rewrite history, like she wanted to wipe the slate clean on her terms, not mine. And honestly, I wasn't interested in helping her feel better about her past choices. Another friend of mine brought up the idea that maybe Anna reaching out was her trying to do the right thing. He said something along the lines of, maybe she's trying to heal. People change. You're successful now, you've got a family who loves you, so maybe this is a chance to forgive and move on. I could see where he was coming from, but I don't think he understood the depth of what it felt like to be abandoned. It's easy to say people change when you haven't been left behind by one of those people. But here's the thing, I've moved on. I've built a life without Anna in it, and I've got people around me who are actually there for me. My mom, my grandparents, they showed up when it counted. They didn't drop me off at a mall kiosk and disappear. They didn't just come back when it was convenient or when they felt ready to make amends. They were there from day one, and they never left. So yeah, I've heard people say I was harsh, that I didn't give Anna a fair chance, or that maybe I'll regret it someday. But the truth is, I don't feel any guilt. I did what I had to do to protect myself. And if Anna really wanted a relationship, she should have thought about that before 20 years went by. I was a kid left behind in a mall, she was an adult making choices. It's not my job to forgive her just because she decided she wants to feel better now. In the end, I'm at peace with my decision. Anna may have changed, but that doesn't erase the past. And if that means I'm the a-hole for not letting her back in, so be it. I'd rather be that than pretend everything's fine when it's not. After everything, I'm grateful for the people who were there from the start. I don't need Anna's validation or her approval. I've got a family who loves me, who never once made me feel like I was less than. That's all I need, and that's more than she ever gave me.